Donna are taking a look at the legal system and children of divorce and some of those consequences.
That's right, Nick. In fact, kids without fathers are certainly at risk, especially if you look at some of these staggering statistics. 85% of youth in prison are fatherless. 71% of high school dropouts grew up without fathers, as did 90% of runaway children. Fatherless youth are also more prone to depression, suicide, delinquency, promiscuity, and drug abuse. Now, considering those numbers, why do the courts commonly grant sole custody to one parent, usually the mother?
A recent Canadian report shows that family court judges are, in fact, harming children by granting sole custody in bitter divorce battles, when research clearly shows joint custody is the best parenting choice for the children of separating parents. Is court the last place a family going through divorce should be?
Joining us from our Queen's Park Bureau is Helen Scott-Goudge, a social worker, and Shirley Levitan, a lawyer, both of whom work with the collaborative practice in Toronto. Shirley, is the problem really family court judges, or is the problem the lawyers who make divorce such a legal blood sport?
That's a very loaded question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I would say that it's a combination. I mean, if we're talking about problems that arise with respect to sole custody orders as opposed to joint custody arrangements, then one has to look at the whole system in totality. I don't know that you can say, or one can say, that it's fair to blame it on the court system or blame it on the lawyers. The court system is a faction of society at large, and it's how prejudices and stereotypes have developed over at least the last century, if not sooner.
Helen, a collaborative, mediated approach to divorce is clearly preferable, but what if a couple is so hateful towards each other that they can't negotiate fairly? What do you do?
Well, what we have found is that kids seem to do well even when there's relatively high conflict. There's increasingly new ways of dealing with this, with using parent coordinators who can help the parents interface between them when there's conflict. And there was a study of 33 other studies of families post-separation, and they found all but 2, even when there was high conflict, the kids were doing much better than with sole custody.
And is sole custody that common? I'm surprised. I mean, I don't think I know of anybody that has sole custody of their children.
Well, you may move in a good crowd because we generally understand that joint custody is, 100% better for kids than sole custody, except in some situations when there's extremely high conflict. Now, the tradition has been, however, sole custody. The tradition has been sole custody. Once upon a time, it was all men that had sole custody in the patriarchal past, and then it was women that all had sole custody. And now, increasingly, we're understanding that, except again in very high conflict situations, it's better for the kids, because ongoing conflict for the kids is one of the biggest predictors of problems for kids. And when they've got a joint situation, it seems to lower the conflict levels.
Shirley, are you aware of many cases, or any cases, where the father has gotten the advantage and gotten sole custody, or maybe more of a break in a joint custody situation?
Yes, I am aware of some of those situations.
How do they come about?
Well, I want to just give a little bit of a background here for the audience to understand that custody and residency are not one and the same thing. Custody, from the legal term, means decision-making. And when people refer to joint custody, they often confuse that with joint residency. And you can have many joint custodial situations where, in fact, the residency is not shared 50-50 or 40-60. So I just wanted to clarify that for the viewers. And the other reality, I think, that needs to be made clear is that typically, I would say until the last maybe 15 years or so, again, because society supported, and as Helen pointed out, a maternal kind of care for the children, is that women typically ended up with sole custody. But one of the factors that isn't discussed for the most part is it's more often than not because men didn't fight for it. And whether or not they believed there was no point, whether there were other issues playing there, we don't know. But when men fight and when they fought, they certainly ended up in a much better situation.
Okay, I want you to clarify then, if a person has sole custody but they share access to the child, does the child necessarily, is there a problem with that child? Is there any sort of an impact on the child? Do you know what I'm saying? Like if they still get to have access to both parents equally, but one has custody, sole custody, does that really affect the child negatively?
Well, to the extent that sole custody, meaning one person making decisions about education, about health, about changes in the schedule when there are certain things that aren't worked out, to the extent that that actually encourages conflict, doesn't discourage conflict, then it becomes a difficulty.
Okay.
Here's another thing I thought of, Helen. We've got these stats that are so startling of youth that are fatherless and the problems they can run into. Would it be equally as distressing for a young girl to not have a father as for a young boy?
That's an interesting question, because Richard Rorschach, people can Google him, did a lot of work on fatherless situations. There's less on motherless situations. But what was found, what they thought was that we all understand that girls do better in separations than boys, and what was understood is that maybe girls need their mothers and boys need their fathers more. So that one of the reasons why boys may not do so well is in the traditional arrangements, which were the arrangements being mainly studied, the boys were in sole residential arrangements with their mothers.
Shirley, would you say...
Are you following that?
So, yeah. So, Shirley, would you say that have you ever fought for a client, let's say a male client, who wanted custody of his kids? Maybe it would be better for him to have his son, if he had a son and daughter, and that the daughter would go with the mother? Are those situations possible?
It has happened. It is very much discouraged by the judiciary, by people who are coming in and assisting with mediating parenting plans or coordinating parenting plans. And it is a clear exception.
You don't want to separate siblings?
You don't want to separate
No?
the children. Yeah. It's not in their best interest to be separated. And as Helen and I were discussing previously, I think what we need to acknowledge is that because the marriage breaks down doesn't mean that the couple in it stop being parents. They still are parent, and they're still going to be responsible for parenting these kids. And in terms of this discussion, joint versus sole, the whole bit, out-of-court dispute mechanisms such as collaborative practice, which were introduced, I guess, into North America about 20 years ago and into Canada about 10 years ago, provides a process for couples going through separation, divorce, to mitigate the stresses between them, the tensions between them. I mean, essentially, it is an out-of-court process. Each person, each parent has his or her own lawyer. You come to the table in a series of four-way meetings, and... Got it.
Sorry to cut you off here, Shirley. We've got to run here, but I want to put up the website, collaborativepracticetoronto.com.
Yes.
Helen Scott-Goudge, Shirley Levitan, thanks so much for joining us. Really interesting stuff, and I'm sure a lot of parents certainly and kids are interested in this as well. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.